Hello and welcome to the SETI Live. My name is Bettina. I'm the director of the SETI Institute's Artist in Residence program. Today's guest is the experimental philosopher, writer, and SETI Artist in Residence, Jonathon Keats. We are catching up with Jonathon on his project, The Library of the Great Silence, an installation art project that addresses one of the implications of the Fermi Paradox. If there are theoretically so many alien civilizations out there, how come we haven't heard from them? Jonathon and I will discuss how an advanced alien civilization may provide us with clues as to how to mount existential threats like climate change or mutual annihilation, and maybe how Earthlings can contribute to this dialogue. But before I introduce our guest, I would like to welcome all of our viewers who are joining us from around the world on YouTube, Facebook, X, Twitch, and LinkedIn. Hey, everyone. Tell us in the comments where you're joining us from. And if you have any questions about what we're talking about, please put those in the comments and we will get to those at the end of our chat. And a little heads up, we are going to ask for ideas of what to put into the Library of the Great Silence. So put your thinking hats on and you can put that in the comments as well. All right, let me introduce our guest. Jonathon Keats is an experimental philosopher, artist, and writer whose conceptually driven transdisciplinary projects explore all aspects of society, adapting methods from the sciences and the humanities. He has exhibited and lectured at dozens of institutions worldwide, from Los Angeles County Museum of Art to Stanford University to the Triennale di Milano, and from South by Southwest to CERN to UNESCO. He's also the author of 6 books on subjects ranging from science and technology to art and design. Aside from being one of our artists in residence here at the SETI Institute, he's, among other things, a research associate at the University of Arizona's Desert Laboratory in Tumanok Hill, a visiting scholar at San Jose State University's Cadre Laboratory for New Media, an advisor in metadisciplinary studies at the University of Zurich. He co-directs the Interspecies Justice Workshop Group at Colby College and the Consortium for Climate Adapted Cultural Heritage. And as an artist, he is represented by Modernism Gallery in San Francisco. Welcome, Jonathon. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be on the show with you.
So this is our second SETI Live together. We chatted about 2 years ago when you had just joined the AIR program, and we talked about what you had planned. And now you turned your idea into reality, and several branches of the Library of the Great Silence exist. So it's about time that we caught up with you. First, though, could you just recap a bit what the concept of the Library of the Great Silence is and how it connects to the Fermi Paradox?
Well, back in the year 1950, Enrico Fermi was having lunch with friends, and everyone was talking about how the universe must be teeming with extraterrestrial intelligence. And as most people probably listening to this show are aware, Fermi famously asked, "Where is everybody?" And this led to what has come to be known as the Fermi Paradox, or more generally, the Great Silence. Basically, that in a universe teeming with extraterrestrial intelligence, you would expect that we would have encountered some of it, either by visitation or at least some sort of appearance on the radio waves. And we haven't, at least to our best of our knowledge. So this has led to a number of different explanations as to why that silence has persisted for so long. And one of them, most obviously, is that we are alone. It's entirely possible, does not seem very probable given the size of the universe and the fact that if we're truly to be Copernican, there's no reason to believe that there's anything special about us. Another that to me is far more compelling, not because I know the answers. I've never met any little green men, and therefore we could well be alone. But the one that really haunts me and that I think has the most to tell us is what's known as the Great Filter. Namely, that when a civilization reaches a level of complexity that it would become apparent to others elsewhere in the universe, it tends to become fragile in some way. There are forces in effect that can be self-annihilating. And this idea dates back to the 1970s, Cold War, lots of reasons to wake up in the morning in a cold sweat, a great deal of existential angst, kind of familiar. In fact, now we have not only that, but also we have climate change, mass extinction, and many other reasons why we might think that perhaps taking the sample size of one, namely planet Earth, looking at the fact that we are now potentially apparent to others elsewhere in the universe by way of broadcasts of I Love Lucy and other important cultural artifacts, that we are also potentially on the verge of killing ourselves off. So this motivated me because I'm not a pessimist and because I feel that even the worst of possible circumstances are really good grounds to act and actually can be quite exciting in that respect. It led me to think about what we could do and led me to think about how most likely there's more than one filter that may lay ahead for us. When you look at climate change, when you look at nuclear apocalypse, there are two right there. So it would seem that within the universe, there probably are many. And so some civilizations, assuming there are others, and here I am assuming that there are, may have gotten past the filtration events that lie ahead for us, and vice versa. So it would be good if we were to share what we know with others and vice versa. This might actually help all of us everywhere to survive and to thrive. And when we think about extraterrestrial intelligence and communication as something that the SETI Institute is very interested in, and that I'm personally very interested in, what are we going to talk about? It could be in the form of the golden record, which is kind of like the barroom bore who tells people, let me tell you a little bit more about myself. Or it could be a conversation that really has substance to it that's of interest to everybody. And it seems to me that the great filter is certainly something to talk about, the existential threat and also the potential. These are really important issues. And so I decided that, being bookish myself and rather liking libraries and finding that they're good places for research, that I would start my own library, the Library of the Great Silence, which is basically an interstellar research center currently situated here on Earth exclusively, but with ambitions to be elsewhere as well. That is a space in which to be able to explore the questions that are central to the Great Silence and to the Great Filter. That is to say, how did we get to be where we are, and what can we do in order not to not for this to be the end, for this to be the beginning of something more. And so I wanted, therefore, to have a library that anybody and everybody could research together and that we could learn from each other. And that led to the idea of throwing out the books. As much as I love them, the books are in English or in another language, and it seems somewhat churlish to insist that beings elsewhere in the universe should speak our language, or even that they would know our language. So instead, I wanted to have this as a library that would be a space in which to be able to look at transformations of all kinds, good, bad, and perhaps indifferent, or in this, or transitions that we may not really understand what the implications are. The transformations that made us who and what we are as life on Earth and as Homo sapiens. And instead of books, to instantiate this or to represent this through objects, things that are implicated in, that are representative of this sort of transformation, in a way that we would then be able to manipulate these objects, and we would be able to make meaning together in terms of understanding the phenomena, their interrelationship, and how to work with these phenomena toward desirable futures amongst the many possible futures that we have here on Earth, and potentially that others, if they decide to join in this library or invite us to their branches, that may obtain elsewhere in the universe.
I think I love this idea that it's a library, but it's a library of objects, but like a cabinet of curiosity, a kind of Wunderkammer of wonderful things, and that we're getting away maybe from language because we're humans using language, but there's so much more ways to communicate. So having objects to ponder that may mean different things to different entities is also really intriguing. And I would love to maybe give people a chance to look at some of those objects. So when you first started off, I'm going to just rewind the slides here a little bit. So when we first started off with that concept, your proposal of objects, I think, were also drawn from things that you had. You have like beautiful things that you already own. And I think if we would poll people and ask them what would go into that library, things like a light bulb is like iconic, remaking fire. I think this is a hand axe, right? I think these
Yes.
are like really like the go-to objects that I think most people would think of, and that are really great choices. There's one like this one. You want to talk a bit about this one? It's a bit more intriguing than the obvious light bulb.
Sure. This would have been more obvious, perhaps, even than the light bulb if you had been around. I was not. At the height of the Cold War in the 1960s, there were distributed to schools and I think many households dosimeters that were meant in case of nuclear fallout to find out when you could leave your fallout shelter and go about your business again. Nobody said, the government, that is, they didn't say that it probably would never happen and that the dosimeter would just basically tell you how soon you were going to die. But nevertheless, there is in this object, I think, as with all the objects that I've selected, it isn't that the object is the only one that could be chosen. It isn't even necessarily central to the problem that, or the issue or the question, but it is one that brings us into that broader space. It was not possible for me to put a mushroom cloud into the Library of the Great Silence. And I also didn't happen to have a mushroom cloud or an atomic bomb, for that matter, in my apartment. And I kind of fancy myself living in the Wunderkammer, and I'm very much inspired by the Cabinet of Curiosities. First of all, as a matter of collecting the world, and secondly, of the taxonomies that manifest through the organization of those materials. And that really was a motivation for me. How do you sort things, and what sort of patterns do you find? And how do you use phenomena such as symmetry, for instance, which was central to the organization of the Wunderkammern in the 18th century, the 17th century? How do we use these as ways in which to be able to find conceptual symmetries? So I simply wanted to find objects that were small enough and that were emblematic enough that we could manipulate them. I'm not saying that beings elsewhere in the universe are the same size as we are or that they have hands, but since I needed to open the library one way or another, and since I happen to be an earthling, a Homo sapiens at that, I needed to start with the ability to be able to work with these objects myself and to invite others I know, mostly those being humans, and select other organisms to be able to work with them. So the dosimeters, I think, are a really good example of an object that is, in a sense, synecdoche, perhaps, that in some way is a representation of a much broader phenomenon.
Yeah, I love that you
And I
included
wanted
that.
also, and with objects, I should say also that I appreciate how you have responded to that, because that's very much aligned with what motivated me. That is to say, language is incredibly powerful, and the English language is very powerful, as is Italian, French, Chinese. These languages each, however, as we know when we try to communicate with each other, have assumptions that are built into them. We find it when we try to talk to each other just in the process of translation. And in language more generally, I think there are many assumptions that are built in. There are many ways in which we construct our world through our language. And I wanted to have a way in which to be able to make a language from first things, from scratch. So you have these objects, you can then use symbols to represent them, you can then manipulate those symbols, and you basically are able to create a language together. And to you can never leave your assumptions entirely aside, but you can at least see them better, perhaps, through the act of trying to work outside of that scaffold.
Yeah, I love that idea of a language of objects. And I remember when you were sort of really pinning down the projects and you were looking to install those, the library, you had like this kind of prototype here in Fonticello at an ancient site. And this is kind of, when we look at the later installations, this is kind of really like a rough cut. The later ones are much more polished and more beautiful, but I love that you just place things like just on the ground here. And they also, this is in Italy, so I noticed that what you included here is also a little Italian flag. We see the light bulb. I'm glad to see the light bulb and the mast. So is that also indicative of where you're installing the library and when? So it's not just the objects, but also a relationship between where a branch of the Library of the Great Silence is being opened and the concept of the library itself.
Yeah, I really want each branch, and the idea is to have branches all around the world and the galaxy and the universe. Why not the multiverse? But there wouldn't be much communication between universes, so that may be a later ambition. I want in each instance, and what we're encouraging here on SETI Live is really a part of this, is this act of introspection that I think is inherent to deciding what to include. Everything belongs. Everything is transformational. Everything is related. Everything has meaning. Yet the fact that the world is the library doesn't really make sense, literally, in the sense that you cannot sensibly work with that sheer bulk of material. So you need to select, which is to some extent going to be arbitrary, but not entirely so. And it's going to be agonizing, not entirely so, I hope, as well. So in each place, beginning with Fontecchio, which is in the Abruzzo region of Italy, which has been beset by earthquakes, most recently in L'Aquila, about a decade ago or thereabouts, longer than a decade ago. It is a place, first of all, in terms of where I cited this, a place that has been many things to many people. This is a former temple to Jupiter that was then rebuilt as a Catholic church that was then deconsecrated. You can see in the walls some of the pieces that come from the temple to Jupiter. That is to say, you see pieces that have inscriptions in them that show the archaeological layers in time. And this deconsecrated space that had fallen to ruin, that I then spent days sweeping out, and it still looked like this. It to me is, in a way, as a building, it really belongs, and it really sets the conditions for making these sorts of inquiries. But in the library, there is one artifact outside of the obvious, the Italian flag, and of course the wine. It is a piece of rubble from the L'Aquila earthquake. And that was suggested by somebody in the community. Most of the objects were suggested by people in the community, and they were meant to really engage people, make it so that they feel like this branch is theirs, but also that the transformations in one place are actually also going to be telling in others. It's simply that in one place they may be more forefronted, or in one time might be more forefronted than others. That is to say, because of the conditions of the pandemic and time, I think that through the face mask, there were many more people much more sensitive to zoonoses and to the myriad conditions that obtain through the way in which we live amidst other species. Through this wreckage from the earthquake, the relationship with the plate tectonics and more generally the instabilities that are planetary in nature, the fact that homeostasis, even if we can achieve it in the moment, is always subject to external forces, and that in fact transformation is not merely something that we ourselves control, and that we need to be careful not to think that it is. It would be hubristic, and in fact, I think in many ways is the underlying condition of the Anthropocene.
So you draw a beautiful connection between place and the library. And I love, so your first really official installation, I think, of the library was at the Allen Telescope Array at Hat Creek. And I love how you installed it there. I love that visitors, you can actually go and visit the ATA. This is you just need to register first, and then you can go up and have a look at our radio telescopes. And now you can also go and see a branch of the Library of the Great Silence. There you are. And I think this is a great shot. So what's in there? And I know, I'm going to spill the beans. I know that another artist in residence who's been up there, Brittany Nelson, has already made a contribution also to this library. So can people also put things in there? Because this is modeled on one of those exchange, like neighborhood book exchange libraries, right? So tell me more about this one.
So yes, this is in fact a little free library. I ordered it online. I made some modifications, and instead of books, I put in objects, but I really wanted to have a model for interaction that was dynamic. And so the idea that you would not only see the objects and would not only organize them using different apparatus that I've developed that allow for different ways of organizing them rigorously, kind of thinking beyond the symmetries that are at the core of the Wunderkammer to the Venn diagram and the potential for interlocking chambers, for instance, to allow for the making of meaning through the overlapping phenomena in objects, instantiated in objects that on the surface may seem unrelated at a secondary and even at a tertiary level. All of that is built into this, but also built into it is this spirit of exchange. And because I built this at the Allen Telescope Array, I chose the Allen Telescope Array because when I thought about where extraterrestrials would be most likely to want to go first if they were to come to planet Earth, I figured that this would be the ultimate tourist attraction. I do not know whether they would go through the formalities that we're asking of Earthlings to have an advanced sign up. I don't think that the SETI Institute would object too strenuously if they didn't. There have not yet, to my knowledge, there have not been any extraterrestrials who have arrived there, but it seemed like it was a good place to begin. And ultimately, at the Allen Telescope Array, the plan is to build a full-scale library branch, funding pending. If anybody happens to have a blank check, let us know. There, however, was a possibility at the outset, at least, of having a micro branch. And micro branches, thank you for the donate now signal at the bottom. The micro branches are meant to be available to all, and available to all in terms of interacting with them, but also in terms of establishing them. I'm currently the chief terrestrial librarian, just by virtue of the fact that I'm the only one crazy enough to have taken the job. but it isn't a job that I insist upon, nor do I in any way insist on any sort of control over this project more generally. So what I am hoping happens, and what I'm hoping maybe even comes out of our conversation here, is that people are interested in starting their own branches and in approaching this in myriad other ways. The fact that I have not used books does not mean that you shouldn't. In fact, I do have a book in the library, a Bible as it happens, not because of the content, but because of the object, the fact that the codex is an object of such significance. But more generally, I think that there are so many ways in which to go about this, and it's only really going to be meaningful for Earthlings, let alone everybody else, if it is available in different communities, if it's a site where people can interact and get to know each other, and we can build a capacity for self-exploration, knowledge, and sharing and cooperation within communities, but also to recognize that the phenomenon of the Anthropocene is simultaneously hyperlocal and planetary, and therefore we need to have the interaction between different places and different people. And that, I think, becomes possible through the exchange between branch libraries, and also in the virtual space through the sort of conversation that can happen as people talk about this, as they allow it to, or bring about changes of various kinds that will keep me surprised and keep us all engaged, I hope.
I definitely think it will. I would like to take this moment, since we're talking about the global community, to do shout outs to all our viewers from all over the world. So we have Oklahoma, France, we have people watching from Montana, from Swansea in the UK, from Scotland, from Chile. Please send us an idea from Chile. That would be fantastic. Pocahontas County, West Virginia, Ohio, Dorset, UK, Cornish Flat in New Hampshire, Romania, Germany, and Frankfurt. So Northern California. I'm scrolling, Texas. So thank you for like joining us. And you saw earlier that little donate button. So it is because of viewers like you that makes the SETI Institute's SETI Lives possible. You know, we are a nonprofit organization. We're always very happy about donations. So if you want to, use that link and make a donation, we'll be very grateful. So we have the Allen Telescope Array. I love that idea that you are also sort of decentralizing it away from yourself as well, and have other people participate. And that library has this permanent installation, but they're also temporary installations. If you go back to the slides, I'd love to show our viewers some of the beautiful installations in gallery spaces. So this is at Modernism Gallery. So we really like in an art space where this exhibition lives. And I love this installation with the with those little beautiful glass jars. And also, I find that your choice of objects becomes more complex and sophisticated. So it's not just a light bulb. You've seen teddy bears and microscopes. And here's one at a research institution that was at Cambridge University, where I love that iteration that also had index cards, where there's a bit more context about each project, each object that was included. So you want to maybe talk a little bit about, I don't know, what you see here. Why did you include, is that hand sanitizer up there that I see? And wine, what is going on here? Are we transforming, in a wine from grapes into wine, or is it more like the religious aspect of wine, or what were you thinking? And again, if you guys in the audience have suggestions for what Jonathon could include, I know Broken Symmetry suggested Optimus Prime or a computer. We're seeing here is like a small versions, I guess, of a computer. But have you considered putting like real, like larger computers into the library as well?
So regarding the objects in Cambridge, I think that this is a really good example of leaving to others the curation of the branch. This was at the Cambridge Festival. That was a time span when this branch was open. It remains open in terms of the index and in terms of the fact that we're continuing to collect materials in the form of a file system. The physical display is no longer there, and the librarians working in Cambridge worked with the local community to find these objects. And they are, in many cases, not objects that you necessarily would find or even that you would initially perhaps recognize for their significance elsewhere. For instance, there was a coin, I think a 50 pence coin, celebrating Brexit, celebrating peace and prosperity that comes with Brexit. So these are objects that when people put them in, those objects may have one meaning, but have other meanings to other people or other beings who encounter them later. To me, seeing the bottle of wine, it is, I think, a particularly interesting instance because we're looking at fermentation, we're looking at preservation, we're looking at intoxication, we're looking at the way in which religion is often through ritual and through a transformation of mindset amongst many other phenomena is undertaken, and how the religious and secular worlds are potentially not necessarily as separated as religions may want to believe, and also how many religions have so much in common in spite of their different gods. There are, as I'm suggesting here in my rambling about this, countless ways in which to understand, I believe, how wine changed everything. And of course, there are books such as Cod, the fish that changed the world. And this has become a bit of a cottage industry, and it could become much more of one. Everything is transformational, and everything indicates everything else. But it's a matter of how we apply our mind to the objects, what we draw into view, and how we relate one object to another that will elucidate certain qualities, will obscure others necessarily. And that is not a bad thing, as long as we don't allow any one interpretation to become definitive. What is
Right.
most generative, I think, is the ongoing exploration. The fact that this brings us into the possibility space, the known and unknown unknowns within that space. We see contingency, we see the degrees of freedom that we have, and we also see the inevitable unforeseen consequences. And putting all that together doesn't necessarily lead to a 10-year plan, and perhaps that's the point. It leads to, however, I think, a more reflective and more constant process of building models, finding patterns, breaking patterns, questioning models, creating heuristics, questioning those heuristics, constantly being in a process of becoming. And perhaps more than anything else, that is a way in which I think to overcome the conditions of the Anthropocene. At least that is what I feel like I've learned most through this process of trying to create something as seemingly bombastic as the Library of the Great Silence, and having failed in the best possible way over and over again to do so. I think that really has been the ultimate way in which to learn about this sort of humility and the sort of relationship of learning from other humans and other beings, and of re-entering into this larger space, this shared space that is planetary and ultimately is galactic, of being with others in these conditions that we all share and all shape, that none of us control, and that all of us need simultaneously to take responsibility for, but also to cede to others their share of the problem space and of the possibility space.
I think that's a great perspective kind of to wrap up on. We're a little bit over time. So thank you for these beautiful insights. I want to just throw out at you a couple of ideas from our audience. I love Bobby Lee Bonnet Jr., who suggested that you may include seeds because you are looking for transformational objects. Of course, there's a big seed library, but I think that's a really great idea. A Game Boy. And I know you have some dice and like game objects in there, and a copy of every ET movie ever made. Bread, I think, if you're going to go for wine, maybe also a great idea. Thank you for everyone who joined us today and for your suggestions. You can always continue to add to the comments even after we stop live streaming, because the live stream will be available on YouTube, and we'll definitely check out your comments. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Jonathan, for your beautiful insights, and we will see you all at the next SETI Live. Bye.
Thank you.